Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the podcast. I truly do appreciate all the folks out there that take time to listen to these little clips and give me an opportunity to share some of this stuff. I thank you very much, folks. I really appreciate it. Today, we finished a discussion on principles of spirituality. Spirituality truly is an ever unfolding process of self discovery. There's no end to spirituality. There's no place where you're like, I got there, guys. I made it. I did it. There's no, it's an ever ongoing process. And really, as one begins to discover themselves to a greater and greater depth, there is a subtlety that comes, a more nuanced, like even a more subtle, that requires a lot of self-awareness to discover deeper aspect of ourselves as we continue the spiritual process. And we'll have some of those discussions later on. But the point of this little recent series was to outline fundamentals of spirituality. What are the fundamental principles of spirituality? And so just to recall, we said about one of the first principles is to a radical responsibility over your own happiness and well-being, that you can always adjust the internal process. You can always adjust how you perceive a situation. You can always review how you can come at it differently in order to improve your well-being. So it's about really taking a deep responsibility for your own well-being, no matter what the situation is. Number two, as we discussed last, was to really try our very best. Doesn't mean we always get it, and we can fail again and again and again, but we continue again and again and again to go in the process of trying to understand people and things and situations rather than to judge. And even in the hardest of situations, there's politicians we don't like. There's people in our workplace that we don't like. There's all sorts of temptations to judge and judge and judge. And like I mentioned on multiple occasions, the point of refraining from judgment is not, I'm going to be kind and nice and I'm a good person who never judges. This is about us. This is about me. I want to be well. I want to be happy. I'm very selfish about my well-being, and my desire, my attempt to reduce my tendency to judge people is done for me, because the more my mind is understanding and fluid, the more I open myself and my heart to well-being, to a certain deeper joy that doesn't need things to be a certain way to be joyous. So that's principle number two. Apply ourselves to understand rather than to judge. Principle number three, I kind of skipped over, but I did discuss it in a previous episode, to, again, an application to be kind and courteous to the best of our ability in every single interaction, every single human and perhaps even animal interactions. Now, again, putting aside, I am a meat eater. I'll be clear, I'm a meat eater. I require animals to be killed for me to eat food. So we could say, well, how is that kind and courteous? But I think there's a certain energy balance. Perhaps I could try to be more kind by sending love to the soul, the animal soul that moved on so I could eat the meat, that to try to put a more effort in that kind of kindness. But so anyways, so in all interactions, human and situations, animals, so on, so kind and courteous, but mostly we're challenged by human interactions. Kind and courteous whenever we can. And again, we do it for ourselves. This is not about, it is about others, but it's ultimately about our own. The Christians use the word salvation, which is a nice word in many ways, but this is about my own salvation, how to save my own well-being, how to improve my own well-being by applying myself to be kind and courteous in all interactions. And finally, the fourth principle, which we'll go a little bit into today, is the idea of having a practice. Okay, having a practice is part of the spiritual life. Now, what does that mean? What kind of practice? What are we talking about? We're talking about meditation, deep breathing, praying, chanting, yoga. Like, it can go on and on. There's so many different things out there. And my view in this sense is that it doesn't matter. The point of having a practice is to teach ourselves to connect with something beyond our sense of individuality, to feel there's an energy greater than my own little person, my own little me. The analogy that I really like to share in these circumstances is I'm a wave in the ocean, and my wave has come up and it will go down one day and re-merge with the ocean. And as the little wave, I want to feel and connect with the ocean. You know, the underlying energy that allows everything to be so incredibly creative, all the animal, like what, you know, whatever your belief system is, something is going on that we exist, and it's pretty darn amazing. And so to try to connect with that sort of higher energy, higher power, God, universe, consciousness, there's so many ways to go about it, to say it. And even for those who don't really have a theistic inclination, would maybe even identify themselves as atheists, it is still undeniable that something remarkable happened in terms of just the mere fact of existence and life itself. And so having a practice to connect with that, again, there are many ways: meditation, praying, chanting, deep breathing, even journaling. There's so many different ways to go about it. And I'm not here for today to tell you which one is the right one. There's a good one for everybody. And sometimes there's a good one for somebody at a certain time. We can even rotate practices, try a different one. If the other one starts to not feel so fresh, we move on to another one. But practicing connecting, practicing connection with something greater than ourselves is part of the fundamentals of spirituality. When we talk about our brain connecting, it needs to learn that. It needs repetition. It needs practice. Okay, we teach our brain to connect more and more with something that feels greater than ourselves. And with practice, it can become easier to do. It can become more spontaneous. You're walking down the street and you just like have a moment of gratitude for existing, things like that. So having a practice is very important because in a way it teaches the brain. It's a skill. It's a skill that has to be learned through practice. You don't learn a skill by hearing about it. You know, I use sometimes the analogy, you don't learn to juggle by talking about juggling or reading about juggling or, you know, listening to a lecture about juggling. You learn about juggling by juggling. You develop the skills. And it's the same thing with many things like coping skills. You know, we talk about coping skills in terms of like managing stress and things like that, which is great. But talking about a coping skill doesn't really work unless you exercise the coping skill and practice the coping skill so that you develop the skill and be able to apply it skillfully. And spirituality is the same thing. It's a skill to learn to connect with a higher sense of higher energy, higher power. And on a regular basis, it's a skill to be able to do it with more ease by simple practice. So here it is, folks. Again, spirituality is a very beautiful, never-ending process of self-discovery. And there are certainly finer and more subtle levels to this whole journey that perhaps we'll cover in different episodes. But today, we wrap up the 4 basic principles, the 4 fundamental principles of spirituality that I wanted to share, which is fundamental or radical responsibility for your own happiness and well-being, understand rather than judge, kind and courteous in all interactions, and make sure to have a practice. Thank you, folks. I really appreciate you all watching this. Hope you have a good day.